The conventional view of punishment is twofold, primarily considering it a means of retribution for a wrongful act and secondarily as a deterrent for potential future acts of similar nature. The foundation of such a perspective is built on the principle of just deserts, or an eye for an eye, where punishment is seen as a deserved response to an act deemed morally or legally wrong. Such a perspective necessitates the presence of free will, which allows individuals the ability to make a choice between right and wrong actions. The deterrent effect of punishment is perceived as a mechanism that discourages individuals from committing wrongful acts, thereby fostering a sense of societal order and security. If our actions are caused by deterministic processes, can we claim that retributive punishment is justified? This questions the morality and effectiveness of punishment in a deterministic paradigm. If determinism holds, then the very idea of retribution could be fundamentally flawed. Individuals, as per determinism, act as they do because of a series of causal influences outside their control. Therefore, the notion of just deserts becomes questionable, and the moral justification for punitive responses is undermined. The conventional perspective on punishment is rooted deeply in our collective consciousness. These conventional views find their genesis in religious, cultural, and legal contexts. The Judeo-Christian concept of divine justice, for instance, significantly influenced Western legal thought. The idea that punishment serves a dual purpose, retribution for the wrong committed and deterrence for potential future misconduct, is as old as human civilization itself. The notion of free will forms the crux of this paradigm, with individuals deemed morally accountable for their actions based on the presumption of their free choice. Determinism challenges the traditional view of punishment by questioning the very premise on which it stands, the freedom to choose. If our actions are causally determined by factors beyond our control, can punishment still be morally justified? Under a deterministic view, the notion of retribution appears fundamentally flawed as individuals are acting not out of free choice but due to deterministic forces. This contradiction between determinism and the traditional view of punishment raises critical questions about the morality and efficacy of our punitive systems. However, note that even within a deterministic framework, deterrence retains some validity. People might not possess absolute free will, but they can still be influenced by the prospect of punishment. Here, however, the purpose of punishment shifts. It is less about penalizing an individual for a past wrong and more about manipulating behavioral patterns in the future. A question arises that whether this approach would lead to a more pragmatic, utilitarian justice system, and whether such a system would align with our moral intuitions and principles of justice. To consider the alternative models of justice, we veer away from retribution. For instance, the restorative justice model, practiced by several indigenous communities and gaining recognition in the formal justice systems, emphasizes repairing the harm caused by criminal behavior. It involves the perpetrator, victim, and often community members, in a process aimed at reconciliation and restoration. Similarly, the rehabilitative model emphasizes the reintegration of the offender into society through treatment and social support. These models inherently acknowledge that an individual's criminal behavior might be a product of circumstances other than absolute free choice, thereby resonating with a deterministic perspective. We must examine the theoretical and practical implications of these models, analyzing their effectiveness and compatibility with determinism. Despite the theoretical appeal of restorative and rehabilitative justice models, their practical implementation raises several concerns. Firstly, the determinism-inspired shift from retribution to reform must contend with the inherent complexities of human behavior. Rehabilitation programs are not a panacea, they require significant resources, expertise, and long-term commitment, with the outcome far from guaranteed. Even if we accept that criminal behavior is the product of determinable factors, these factors are so numerous that manipulating them to predict or alter behavior presents a significant challenge. Secondly, there is a potential danger of determinism being used to justify overreach by the state. If criminal behavior is viewed purely as a product of deterministic factors, it could pave the way for increasingly invasive measures under the guise of prevention or reform. There are moral and legal concerns around the potential misuse of predictive policing technologies and preemptive detentions. This creates a paradox where determinism, originally a challenge to the morality of punishment, becomes a basis for arguably immoral practices. Another concern arises from the victim's perspective, as a justice system underpinned by determinism might focus heavily on offender reform, possibly overlooking a victim's needs for closure and justice. It is crucial, therefore, that any shift towards determinism-based justice models incorporates mechanisms to ensure that victims' rights and dignity are not compromised. Consider this: the Norwegian justice system is renowned for its focus on offender rehabilitation, even for serious offenses. The emphasis is on providing the offender with the skills and support to lead a law-abiding life post-release. However, despite these efforts, recidivism, the tendency of a convicted criminal to re-offend, rates remain a concern, underscoring the complexities involved in modifying human behavior. On the other end of the spectrum, the predictive policing algorithms used in some US jurisdictions offer a glimpse into the potential dangers of determinism-based crime prevention measures. These algorithms use historical data to predict future crime hotspots or potential offenders, but they perpetuate systemic biases, intrude privacy, and may punish individuals for uncommitted crimes. The third issue pertains to the social and psychological impacts of a reformed justice system. Our society has been acclimated to a punitive justice system where retribution is not only seen as just but also serves to deter potential criminals, appease victims, and reinforces societal norms. Hence, transitioning to a deterministic model, where punishment is largely seen as an outdated concept, could trigger considerable resistance, mistrust, and unrest. Imagine a hypothetical case of a serial killer who was shaped into a violent predator by an unfortunate combination of genetic predisposition, child abuse, and subsequent exposure to violence. Under a deterministic model, he would be seen as a victim of his circumstances rather than an architect of his atrocities. Society, however, might struggle to accept this view, finding it unjust that the killer's punishment is reduced or replaced with treatment. Such scenarios could create societal backlash, leading to vigilante justice or a complete rejection of the justice system. On the psychological level, a significant aspect of current penal philosophy is its role in satisfying the instinctive human desire for retribution. This just deserts principle is deeply ingrained in many cultures, with its roots in religious texts and traditional wisdom. Studies in cognitive psychology suggest that humans are intuitively retributivist and feel satisfaction upon seeing wrongdoers receive their deserved punishment. Thus, an abrupt shift towards a deterministic justice model may cause cognitive dissonance and dissatisfaction among the public. It is worth noting that there is a balance to be struck between determinism and retribution. The binary framing of retributive versus rehabilitative justice may not be the most constructive approach. Instead, an integrative model that acknowledges both deterministic factors and personal accountability might be more practical and socially acceptable. This model would advocate for proportional punishment combined with efforts to reform the offender and address the deterministic factors influencing their criminal behavior. The fourth element of this discussion revolves around the practicality and feasibility of a rehabilitative model. Implementing such a system requires a radical shift in many aspects of the current justice system. The court would also need to gain access to reliable neuroscientific tools capable of assessing an individual's capacity for change, which currently don't exist. Furthermore, designing suitable rehabilitation programs would be an immense challenge due to the vast diversity of criminal behaviors and their corresponding causal factors. Imagine a convicted felon found guilty of multiple instances of violent assault. In a rehabilitative system, the court would need to assess the root causes of the individual's aggressive tendencies. These could range from genetic predisposition to anger issues, exposure to violence during formative years, substance abuse, mental health conditions, or a combination of these factors.